Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Existence Project. We're diving straight into a huge question today with Chloe. Chloe, you're studying philosophy, right?
Yep, and I love it. To me, it's flawless.
Flawless, huh? Well, philosophy definitely plays a huge role in how we understand reality, and that's what we're here to talk about, the existence of God. We believe there's resounding evidence for God Almighty, but often people want physical proof, something they can put in a lab.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty obvious though. God isn't physical, so how could the evidence for something non-physical be physical?
You hit the nail on the head. What we're actually arguing is that there is a method to figure out every eternal truth. And that method, we believe, is what religion has consistently brought to every generation. The prophets of God, they all taught a specific method, a testimonial truth, if you will.
Like, if you're new in LA and you want to find the best ice cream, you kind of go with what people are saying, right?
Exactly. We're not the only rational beings in the universe. We get that our own logic isn't the absolute end-all. We rely on our fellow humans. And here, we're saying that all the prophets of God actually demonstrated God's existence and showed us how to know Him. It's just not fair for us to be stuck in doubt forever. We should know if God exists.
And that's actually exactly what I'm trying to do right now. I've deconstructed Christianity, so I'm in the space of, okay, I know that's just not historically or anthropologically accurate. Looking at the facts, there are contradictions.
Not. And as a Muslim, I totally understand that. There are parts of the Bible that have remained relatively untouched and are accurate, but big chunks just aren't. And that's a historical fact we have to acknowledge. So what we're talking about here is the Quranic concept of God, because what we say is that the concept of God that was put forth by every prophet in every era to every nation, we as creative human beings who like to do things our own way have changed, messed with those original ideas. The concept of God isn't some bearded man in the sky. It suggests that if there's creativity in nature, then the force behind all of that, the ultimate force, the cause of all causes, the prime mover, the uncaused cause, the grand architect, whatever you want to call it, that has to be an intelligent, conscious force, and it's not embodied. There's absolutely nothing physical about it.
So it has to be outside? Is it just like the whole universe working together in some way?
Well, first off, it's outside the universe because the universe can't cause itself. A physical thing can't cause itself. The person who says it can cause itself, well, they have to show us examples of things that cause themselves, which they don't. So if something caused, let's say, the flow of time or physical matter or energy, whatever got all of this started, it has to be outside of those things. You asked a really great question about communication in the end, and that's really what it boils down to. Can we communicate with it? Can it communicate with us? Can we actually have a relationship? Does it make an impact in our lives? That's what we're arguing. We've been talking about DNA with people. DNA has one of the most complex languages imaginable inside of it. That's a language. And then it has mechanisms within itself that interpret those languages. And then, for example, the way that forces, we say forces are blind, but they interact. They have this really complicated relationship with one another. And then there's a lawgiver, because there are specific principles. For instance, we say there are about 30 fundamental principles of the universe, and all of them are working together. You change even one of them, and everything just falls apart. So we're saying, how can the thing that has given every single particle in this universe its language, including you and I, itself not be capable of communicating?
It's interesting when you say it has to be outside of the universe, because then it really gets into a fundamental metaphysical question of, has the whole universe always been? What's the likelihood of that versus something coming from nothing? And can we even prove that nothing exists? That's a really, really hard claim in philosophy that I've actually written on.
You have. Can I respond to both of those points? Very respectfully. On the first point about the universe being eternal, the Holy Quran actually rejects that. The book we believe is revealed from God, and that's kind of our measuring stick for the Abrahamic monotheistic ideas.
Generally speaking, but I'm questioning the whole thing, right? Like, first you have to question Judaism. If Judaism is true, then Christianity or Islam could be true. So you have to figure out if that original one was correct, and then if the origin was correct, then you can think about whether the other one was correct.
I love it. I genuinely wish more people thought like you. The Holy Quran says Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, peace be upon them, they are all true prophets of God. We humans muddled and meddled our way into their teachings. They were human beings just like us, but they demonstrated God Almighty through incredibly compelling signs. Nothing unnatural,
but something that was extremely impressive to the people of that time. That was their connection with God. Coming back to your point about the beginning of the universe, yes, there was a beginning, and from a science perspective, we have a substantial amount of evidence for that. The original idea in all of Abrahamic monotheism, and I can speak specifically about the Holy Quran, which even its opponents admit has been unchanged for the last 1400 years since it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, it says, "Do not the disbelievers see, those who don't believe in God, that the heaven and the earth were all a closed-up mass, not nothing, a closed-up mass, and we caused it to blow out asunder suddenly." And then the Holy Quran also talks about how we are the ones who brought this universe into existence, and we are the ones who continue to go on expanding it. So this concept of the Big Bang, the expansion of the universe. But it also says that just as the universe was created, it will be rolled up like the rolling of scrolls, and we will create again. So it's kind of like the beginning of space-time, end of space-time, beginning of space-time, end of space-time.
Okay, so that essentially means it's not eternal.
It's not eternal because the Holy Quran also says that in the end, the thing that was at the beginning, it was not nothing, it was God Almighty, and at the end, when everything is finished, it will be God Almighty. And scientifically, we know because of entropy, even if it takes trillions and trillions of years, eventually there will be no ability for the universe to use energy in any useful way, let alone to have chemistry. And what's interesting actually,
Yeah, that's something important in philosophy. We actually rely on that a lot, that you're constantly going towards entropy, always, continuing that way. I don't want to take too long, but to sum up, the fundamental basis of your argument is that something came from nothing.
Sorry, let me please clarify. It's not that something came from nothing. God Almighty was there. He is not a physical being. Whatever he is far outside of the physical dimensions of this universe as we understand it.
So you wouldn't have to have the assumption of nothing, because you could assume, God. You could replace the idea of does nothing exist with God has always existed, and then, space.
can I just elaborate on this point very quickly? The idea is, Richard Dawkins and other atheists love to use the argument from infinite regress. They say we have to continuously, infinitely ask who created this, and then who created the thing before that, and who created why do we stop at God? Well, what is Richard Dawkins proposing? As a philosophy major, you can appreciate. He's proposing an infinity. But if God Almighty himself is the infinity, then you don't ask about where that infinity came from or the beginning of an infinity, because by definition, there is no beginning to an infinity.
So it's almost like, people might mistake it as, oh, the Big Bang means that there must have been nothing and it has to come from something. But really, there could have always been something that we could consider in infinity, and then that starts and ends our universe.
Yeah, like let's call it a mind. We have to understand it relative to whatever. There's a substantial amount of evidence. Every branch of science shows immense intellect is involved in trying to replicate nature. To say our experience dictates we need intellect to, for example, produce DNA step by step from inorganic chemistry,
It could be random.
absolutely it could be. But if you consider the lowest possible probability and the numbers involved, it's utterly improbable for things to be absolutely random. Nobody wagers on the lowest conceivable probability in life. Why risk your life's purpose or the universe's ultimate reality on such a low chance?
If you can explain the birth of space-time, then maybe whether it's random or not is irrelevant.
Yesterday, someone claimed the universe is infinite, but we've only had 13.8 billion years. That short time frame exponentially increases the improbability of pure randomness. Our experience shows that when things are constructed, like a building, an intelligent architect is involved, so claiming infinite time is simply untrue.
But that's the thing. I feel like even with basically everything, with the existence of space-time, and with the infinity of infinity, and with the possible finity of infinity, and even I saw your sign and I was like, because you can't prove one thing or the other, right?
I think respectfully I can. If we change the question to God does not exist, prove me wrong, how would you prove me wrong?
Okay.
So I'll use examples of atheists, right? The militant atheists who actually believe that God certainly does not exist. They've said that even if they hear Richard Dawkins, for example, one of the most famous names, he was asked in an interview, famously, it's all over YouTube, if God Almighty directly beckoned to you and spoke to you and said, I am here, would you believe? He said, probably not. This is what we're saying is the unfair lens with which this subject is being dealt with. Many young, impressionable minds who are easily swayed by the jargon many atheists use start looking at this in an unfair way. All we're saying is, look, not everyone is a philosopher. What's your major?
Anthropology.
Anthropology.
That's how I deconstructed Christianity. That's essential, those anthropological arguments. That's how you can even tell if Christianity is true or not. It's clear there are literal contradictions anthropologically that make it impossible, at least in my view, to be considered believable. And I'm a big fan of philosophy. I really like philosophy. So this question for me has no answer. Because it's just like, okay, the only example I could come up with was Freud's unconscious and conscious mind and everything, right? Because Freud's theory is the only thing that can prove itself, and it cannot be disproven through empirical evidence and whatever. The only reason why it can only be a theory, and the only people who can indeed believe it, are the people who believe it. So God would be kind of like God's existence would be kind of the same thing, because God's existence is the proof for God's existence. You can't exactly pick things and be like, oh yes, then he definitely exists, because you can't disprove it either.
I love what you said, if I can respond to this point. So I agree with you that as far as our rationality, our human logic, our human ability to break things down, to tinker with subatomic particles, to stretch our philosophical abilities are concerned, it will only take us to perhaps the conclusion, if we are unbiased, there should be something behind everything. Perhaps there is a creator. Oh yeah, Islam actually challenges that. Islam says the only thing a person can truly trust beyond 100% is their personal experience. Islam says, here is a recipe. It has pointed to a version of God that is so consistent with human reason, so consistent with human rationality, that it says, you and I, look, not everyone is a philosopher. I'm a Muslim imam. Not everyone is an anthropologist. The key to finding God and knowing God, Islam says, nobody deserves to remain suspended in doubt and suspicion, especially about why we're here and if we have a creator, right? That is the definition of hell in Islam. The definition of hell is genuinely coming to the conclusion, the false conclusion it postulates, that we are just an accident, we have no purpose.
Exactly. And lately I have been struggling with, I have no idea my purpose, right? I have no idea my question. Yeah, I'm like, dude, live. Live, marry, have children, get a job, die. What else am I gonna do? What is my purpose? Because you see people who are born with a purpose, they know what they're here for. And for us who, are trying to find it everywhere else and also within ourselves, it's really difficult to find a reason. And man without reason, man without purpose, is almost nothing. We don't know how to live. That's why we've had, for as long as we've lived, we've had something like, we want a connection with everything. We want a connection.
I always say, look, thirst, by inference, is evidence for water. But far greater than our physical thirst is our thirst for purpose. Islam says it's not about how educated someone is, how much wealth someone has, what ethnicity they belong to, what religion they grew up in. Every human being should have equal access to spiritual opportunity. Nowadays, it's all about equality of opportunity. What about spirituality? It has to be something that men and women alike, humankind alike, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, had. And that is the faculty for genuine, sincere prayer. the laboratory of the human soul. Conduct the experiment. And in the end, if there is a day of judgment, you say, God, I asked you. You know my heart of hearts. You created me. If that is true, I asked you. And that is by asking God directly and experiencing Him in an observable, measurable, repeatable way.
And how do you do that in a world, in a place, and in a physical realm? For example, there's information and data flowing through us right now. There's insane amounts of your DNA, for example. How did DNA come about in our environment 24/7? Who told the atoms to behave in the way that they did so that they become RNA eventually? Who told RNA to communicate with each other and continuously increase? But maybe that's the thing. Maybe no one told them. Maybe it is a consciousness of the thing itself, right? Because then you can come back to all the ideas of unity and why we all come from a single cell, All living things and all material things come from a certain unity of some kind.
I agree, but nothing physical can cause itself. It has to be caused by something else.
Exactly. Nothing is made, everything is transformed.
Okay, physical determinism. So it's like once you have a physical, if you have dominoes, if you push the dominoes over, each domino...
Who pushed the domino? That's who pushed the first domino.
Exactly, and who created the domino? That's what I mean. You cannot escape the logical necessity. Every single argument a person presents, you need an intelligent and/or powerful force behind all of that. I was given the example of the building. Let's say this building is constructed. The only reason the building is constructed is because we in the physical realm with the minds and bodies that we have constructed it. That's the only reason, right?
But in a realm that is, because here God, I feel like, is more like a metaphysical. It has to be outside of our universe.
Exactly. So how does something non-physical construct something physical? We as physical beings can only construct physical things. I love that idea and I love that question. So the idea of metaphysical, that's exactly what we're saying. Consciousness is metaphysical. A mind is metaphysical. Everything as you go outside the physical realm demands that. For example, everything you need to build with intent, to construct with intellect is metaphysical. Intelligence is metaphysical, right? Intent is metaphysical. All of these things that we call the mind of God are metaphysical. And so that is why we say that as soon as you leave the physical realm and we need a non-physical thing to have caused this, then it makes sense that that thing is conscious and deliberate and intelligent. And that is why at every step for 13.8 billion years, what was chosen and selected? We talk about the 4 fundamental forces, the 6 fundamental, 26 fundamental constants in physics. You change even one of them and stars can't form, hydrogen can't form, let alone life, let alone interesting organic chemistry. At what point is it truly scientific, methodical, and unbiased to just label 13.8 billion years of astronomically impossible coincidences as random, rather than saying, okay, everything seems to point in a very particular direction. Maybe there's something pushing it. Like I give the example of a dice. You roll a dice, you get it's a 1 out of 6 chance to roll a 6. You roll it again, it's 1 out of 36. You roll it again, it's like 1 over 250, 1 over 256, and it keeps going and going. You're 10 or 500 or 1 billion rolls of the dice later, if you keep getting 6s, you're gonna be like, someone's weighted that dice. That's what we're saying.
I like that. This is really, you're really rigorous philosophically. I've been looking for this.
So what's the next step for you?